Let's face it, buying your first house is daunting. Real estate investors throw around complicated words like pre-approval, contingency, and debt coverage. The process can feel overwhelming. And if you're anything like me, you want to understand the whole process before just taking a big leap of faith. So in this video, I'm going to break down the entire process for you from start to finish. I'm going to show you every single thing that you need to prepare in order to buy your first house. We're going to cover 4 really important steps, and knowing these steps ahead of time can help you to avoid some serious headache, because what most people don't talk about are all of the things that can go wrong buying a house. Making mistakes can easily cost you tens of thousands of dollars, but with the right preparation, those mistakes can be easily avoided. So let's jump right in with step number 1, financing. Now for me, the very first house I ever bought was an Airbnb investment property, but the process is pretty much the same whether you're buying an Airbnb, a long-term rental, or a home to live in. In any case, the very first step to buying any property is deciding how you're going to pay for it. At its core, buying a property is just like buying anything else. You have money and someone else has a house. You're going to give them the money and they're going to give you the house. The major difference here is that there's a pretty good chance you don't have enough money. To make up the difference, you're going to borrow some of the money from the bank. That's called a mortgage. So naturally, establishing how much money you do have is an important first step. Let's quickly look at 3 different scenarios to better understand how this works. In each scenario, let's assume you're buying a house that costs $500,000. First, let's assume that you're a baller and you've got $500,000 cash just in a big briefcase. In this case, buying the house would be really simple. You give the seller your briefcase and the seller gives you the keys to your new home. You and the seller would also sign some paperwork saying that you now own the home. This is just to protect you so that they can't come back later and claim there was never a briefcase and that you're just a crazy person in their house. Pretty simple, right? But now let's assume that you don't have 500 grand just lying around. Let's say you've only got $100,000. Well, in that case, you need to borrow $400,000 from someone in order to seal the deal. But who? Who do you know that's got $400,000 and is ready to hand it over to you? Answer: the bank. Now, banks do have a lot of money lying around, but they aren't just going to give it to any Joe Schmo who walks in and asks for it. They've got conditions. 4 main ones, to be exact. The first condition is that they want to know what you plan on spending the money on. If you tell them that you're going to head to the casino and put it all on black, they're quickly going to show you the nearest exit. The reason for this is pretty simple: too much risk. If you roll a red, they lose 400 grand, and they've got no way of then going and recouping that loss. Now, let's say that you tell them that you're gonna buy a house with the money. Well, unsurprisingly, your chances of success just went up. You see, the banks know that houses tend to hold their value over time, which means they're low risk. So they'll write up an agreement that says they'll lend you the money to buy the house. And if you stop paying back the loan, they'll just come and take the house. Then they'll sell the house to someone else and recoup their 400 grand. Pretty simple, right? Except the banks are actually a little more cautious than that even. They want to make sure that even if the house you buy goes down in value, they'll still be able to recoup their 400 grand. So they make you buy a $500,000 house with their $400,000. You've got to come up with the other 100 grand on your own. If you try to buy a $400,000 house, they're probably only going to lend you about $320,000. And then you've got to come up with the other 80. That way, even if the house goes down in value by 20%, they're still not going to lose any money. So that covers condition number 1 of knowing what you're going to spend the money on. And the next condition is a lot more straightforward, I promise, is that you have a history of borrowing money, ideally from banks, and paying it back on time. You know that friend of yours who still owes everyone money from like 4 years ago? Yeah. The banks don't want to lend money to people like that. They want to lend money to your friend who pays you back instantly as soon as you tell them that they owe you. And the banks have a fancy way of keeping tabs on this stuff. It's called a credit score. Basically, if you pay the banks back on time, they give you points. If you pay them back late or don't pay them back at all, they take points away. If you've got a lot of points, in other words, a high credit score, then they'll happily loan you money. If you've got a low credit score, then they either won't lend you money at all or they'll loan you money, but at a much higher interest rate. Let's stop here for a second and quickly talk about interest rates. For the purpose of this video, all you need to know is that the bank is a business, and they're a business that loves profit, just like any other big corporation. The bank makes their profit by charging something called interest when they loan you money. Basically, they'll loan you $1, but in exchange for that service, they'll charge you, say, 10 cents. That's their fee. So when you go to pay them back, you'll owe them the initial $1 plus the extra 10 cents that they charged as a fee. Just to mess with your head and make things more complicated than they really need to be, they gave this fee a name, and it's called interest. Okay, now let's move on. The bank's third condition is pretty straightforward as well. They obviously don't expect you to pay back all $400,000 all at one time. So instead, they make a repayment schedule. Basically, they tell you exactly how much you'll need to repay every month and for how long until the 400 grand is fully repaid plus the interest you owe them. Again, the banks are cautious. They want to check that you can actually afford to make these payments. So to do that, the bank's going to want to take a look at your income as well as what your expenses are going to be. As long as you have enough money coming in to cover all the expenses with some buffer room, just in case, the banks will be happy. If you don't have enough money coming in, the bank will offer to lend you less. This way, the monthly repayment will be smaller and you'll cover all of your expenses more easily. So the more money you make and the less that you spend, the more money the bank is going to lend you. The fourth condition banks have to lend you money is that they want to see the property that you're actually buying. They do this to make sure that you can actually live in it, if that's your plan. Because if you can't live in it, like let's say if it doesn't have a roof, then you're going to need to pay rent somewhere else. And in that case, all their calculations from that last step would be all messed up. And even more importantly, they want to make sure that the property is actually worth what you're paying for it. This part is crucial because remember, if everything goes wrong, the only way for the bank to get their money back is by taking the property from you and selling it. If it turns out that the property was never worth what you decided to pay for it, that puts the bank in a bad spot. But herein lies the issue. What if you haven't found the property you want yet? If you don't know the exact property just yet, then how can the bank possibly determine what that property is going to be worth? But fear not, the banks have thought of this too. And that's why they created something called a pre-approval. Basically, a pre-approval is just a letter from the bank. And the letter says that they're going to lend you money as long as the property you select meets their criteria. That way, you can show this letter to people and they'll actually take you seriously. They'll be all, ooh, look at Joe Schmo. He's got money to spend. Okay, now let's recap where we're at. You want to buy a house. It costs 500 grand and you've got 100 grand. So you went to the bank, you asked them for 400,000 bucks. You told them you're going to use it to buy a house. You showed them your credit score and you showed them proof of all the money that you make and all the expenses you pay each month. Now the bank gave you a pre-approval letter that tells people you've got money to spend. You with me still? Now, before moving on to the second step, which is finding the house you want to buy, I just want to quickly answer the question that I know some of y'all are asking. What if I have less than $100,000? And that's a great question because there actually is something you can do in this situation other than just buying a cheaper house. It's called first-time homebuyers or FHA or something similar depending on where you live. Basically, these are mortgages that allow you to pay a lower percent as a down payment. So on a $500,000 home, instead of paying 100 grand, which is 20%, you may be able to only pay 5%. $25,000, or potentially even as low as 3.5%, depending on where you live and what's available from your bank. But there's a catch. Remember why banks want you to pay for 20% of the home with your own money? It's so that if the value goes down, they'll still be able to recoup their money by taking the property and selling it. So when you put less money down, there's more risk for the bank. Here's a quick example. If you buy a $500,000 house and only put $17,500 down, 3.5%, then the bank can be in a pretty tight spot. If you stop repaying the loan and the property value goes down to $450,000, they're going to be taking a loss. So if you put a small amount down, the bank is going to make you get something called mortgage insurance. This is an insurance policy that you pay for. The insurance policy will cover the bank in case of any losses, like in the scenario that I just described. So putting less money down will cost you more. The bank knows that you're tight on cash, so instead of making you pay for the insurance out of pocket, they'll tack it on to your loan. But don't be fooled. This still costs you money, just not right now. Okay, so that's everything you need to know about banks, mortgages, and paying for your house. If you're still with me, then do me a huge favor and hit the like button on this video. In part 2 of this video, we're going to walk through the next step in the home buying process, finding a house. So if you want to be sure not to miss that video, then hit subscribe and hit the notification bell. And I'll see you in the next one.